Well, welcome. We're so glad you chose to spend your valuable time with us here today. And as I always say, we strive to make it worthwhile for you by giving you really great content that you can use to elevate your life and negotiate your best life to get more of what you want and deserve. And today will be no exception. Today we're going to be talking with Sam Daley-Harris about negotiating through transformational advocacy. So welcome, Sam. It's so great to have you here.
Great to be here.
And for those of you who may not know him, Sam founded the anti-poverty lobby called Results. He co-founded the Microcredit Summit Campaign. He founded Civic Courage. And his 2024 edition of his book, which we'll be talking about, Reclaiming Our Democracy, Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. It was named an editor's pick by Publishers Weekly BookLife, so that's a pretty big deal. And he's also been interviewed on NPR's Here and Now and 1A and PBS's Laura Flanders and Friends. And Ashoka founder Bill Drayton said that Sam is one of the certified great social entrepreneurs of the last decade. So a lot of the coaching that Sam does is around advocacy and activism, and particularly vis-a-vis Congress. So you can see why I wanted to have him here to share with you. So Sam, why don't you kickstart for us? How did you come to this work? I assume there was a deep why for you that led you to it. What would that be?
Okay, great. And I'm going to just mention, because I tell this story a lot, but I think it fits into the art of feminine negotiation.
Fabulous.
What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to tell my story of self. And that was developed by Harvard professor Marshall Gans. And it basically asks, what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment?
Yeah.
Like knowing your why and sharing it. And I'm going to share it. I'm not holding back. But always I ask people to think about theirs.
Yeah.
What happened in their life and what decisions did you make to get you to this commitment? So here's mine, because it's kind of an odd journey. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And then 44 years ago, I founded the anti-poverty lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what's the connection? When I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a friend around high school graduation in 1964, and the assassination of US Senator Robert Kennedy around college graduation in 1968 got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 9 years later, this is now 1977, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this event thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know?
Yeah.
I'm a musician. I mean, it's inevitable in my mind because there are no solutions. Again, what do I know?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking if there were solutions, somebody
it would have happened.
would have done something by now. But I go to this event and it's obvious right away. There's no mystery to growing food, clean water, basic health, literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own. And my questions, why am I here? What am I here to do? Here comes the end of the story. In 1978, 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from Jimmy Carter's Commission on World Hunger and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress or your member of parliament? I don't want to know if you wrote them. I don't want to know if you met, just the name.
Yeah.
Out of 7,000 asked, 200, fewer than 3% could answer correctly. 6,800, over 97% could not tell me the name of their member of Congress. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington in this case. On the other hand, I'd ask you, I think there's something about being vulnerable,
Yeah.
something about sharing your why that must be, I'm assuming, and you can correct me, an aspect of feminine communication and feminine
Yeah.
negotiation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And are you asking me to share my why? Is that what
Yeah.
you're
Well, no, you can if you want, but just that you agree or would correct me
Yeah, no,
that
both.
it fits in.
I love that you explore the deep why. And in particular, it was one of the things, ironically, that caused me to sort of shift directions. I'd been a social justice attorney for, several decades. And, my clients used to call me the Barracuda. And, I grew up in a low rental apartment complex in what was considered a pretty tough neighborhood, but always instilled with me from my dad, who, worked in a local factory. Always treat people with dignity and respect, right? Talking about the importance of relationship, the importance of having a voice. And I didn't realize, to be honest, Sam, the gift until much later in my life, the gift he gave me of my voice, like from the youngest age possible. We'd have these spirited debates around the table. So I just grew up believing my voice mattered. And most people don't. I think it was a profound difference. And in my the law practice, I started, wide-eyed and looked around. I'm the only woman. And I'm like, no, these people are going to be taking me, these guys predominantly, right, are not going to be taking me seriously unless I get scrappier, which I did. And hence the name Barracuda got attributed to me as counsel, which they meant as a compliment. And I had my epiphany, a series of epiphanies, that this is not how we need to be interacting with each other. Everything we've been taught about what it means to negotiate, what it means to be successful in business and law and life is backwards. So that sort of, and in fact, it's ironic you talk about purpose, because for me, my business, when I started this business, I called it Women on Purpose. And it was about, I think so many of us in life don't follow our why. So for our listeners there, I love that Sam challenged you to say, hey, think about this. Don't just be listening to the conversation about it. Engage with yourself. Engage with yourself about it. And Sam, I'd love to ask, your book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, I hadn't realized that it had been originally released back in 1994. And like President Jimmy Carter said, the book was a roadmap for global involvement in planning a better future. What led you these, 3 decades later to update and release the book now?
And in the latest version, there have been 12 chapters removed and 7 new sections. So it's different in a bunch of ways. But, it didn't take a rocket scientist to realize that these years, reclaiming our democracy is something that's really important. And I did an interview on a show called 1A. It's goes to about 350 radio stations, NPR, National Public Radio in the United States. And the question number 2 from the host brought me completely back to why a 30th anniversary edition was so needed. And this is question number 2. I can basically do it by heart. He said, the nature of our politics these days, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career, and this is question number 2.
Yeah.
This is my career, and I feel beat down by it. I don't advocate in the way others do because I'm a political journalist, but I do have to pay attention.
Yeah.
It's a grind. It's a grind, Sam. I mean, I know you know that. What am I feeling? What is a way out of that? That was question number 2. And I think he was speaking for so many of us. And the first
Yeah.
thing I said was Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweickart said, we aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're the crew.
Yeah.
Well, are we? And if we're crew, how does crew operate? And the second thing I said after this impassioned question was activists and futurists. Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do anything about it. Why would I if nothing I do makes a difference?
Yeah.
So that interviewer kind of
I
brought
love
me
that. I love that.
home to,
Well, let's hope this interview sparks your next great book.
very good.
I mean, and it's fine. Let's tap into that for a moment, because I think that the interviewer talked about that sense of feeling impotent and defeated. And gosh, if there's ever a time in our history that we really needed people to be stepping up and advocating and getting more curious, it's now. Why do you think so many people, most people, frankly, shy away from advocacy?
Well, mm, I mean, I took you back to 1978 and 79 when fewer than 3% of high school students
Yeah.
who are now in their 60s could even name their member of Congress. In this case, I don't know that it's completely different in too many other places. But I think another answer to your question is if we don't learn civics in high school,
Yeah.
then, and let's say even college much, then where's the next place we might learn it? Well, maybe from the nonprofit organizations that we might engage in. And they're not doing a very good job either. Let me give you a
Yeah.
couple of stats that point to this. The independent sector did a survey of nonprofits, and they found that 31% of nonprofits had done advocacy or lobbying in the last 5 years. And the 31% was less than half
Wow.
of those doing it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
fewer nonprofits are doing it, but it gets worse. This is US context, but I'm afraid it
Yeah.
might be true elsewhere. The Congressional Management Foundation asked grassroots nonprofit professional staff what their primary tactic was.
Yeah.
And 79% said an email form letter.
Oh, gee.
Give me your name and your zip
Yeah.
code, and I'll send the email for you. And 79% said an email form letter was their primary tactic, but
Yeah.
only 3% of congressional staff said an email form letter is highly effective.
Yeah, of
So
course.
you ask, why do so few of us engage in as advocates? And part of my answer is because we're meaningless, inconsequential actions to take too much that don't make a difference and that leave us feeling like we've just eaten a bunch of empty calories, which
Yeah.
is why I promote not that transactional advocacy, sign the petition, transaction complete, but I promote transformational advocacy, where you're trained, encouraged, and succeed at doing things as an advocate, like that you never thought you could do,
Yeah.
like meeting with a member of parliament and bringing them on board to your issue, or writing a letter to the editor on something you care about and getting it published in the paper. And when you do those things you never thought you could do, you see yourself in a new light. You see yourself differently. Really, a transformation
Yeah.
has occurred as to who you are
Yeah.
as a citizen in your democracy.
Love it. And I definitely, I want to unpack that whole transformational advocacy. I think it's so important and, sort of the heart of our chat today. But before we do, when you said, like, I'd love if you could give us some advice that would help empower people in this world where, and you just started touching on it there, Sam, as well, I think, but, in a world where people are losing faith and question their ability to be able to have any impact, what advice do you have to help empower them to
Right. So
flip that story?
basically, I'm urging people to look for organizations that offer three things. In number one, there's two in one. Number one is enrollment, bringing new people in, not just to build an e-blast list,
Yeah.
but bringing new people in and forming them into chapters, recruitment, basically. Most groups aren't doing that. They're
Yeah.
not recruiting people and forming into local chapters, so you're not acting alone. And the other part of that is building community.
Yeah.
So these groups tend to have a monthly webinar with guest speakers and Q&A and inspiration and maybe a little training. So recruitment and building community.
Yeah.
Two, training. How do you get the meeting with the elected official? How do you plan for the meeting? What do you ask for in the meeting? How do you write a letter to the editor? Two, training. Three, this is one they mostly really don't do, which is breakthroughs. The organization encourages you to do things as an advocate, as we discuss, you never thought you could do. And as a result, you see yourself differently. There's a drawing in the book where there's this small circle on one side labeled your comfort zone,
Yeah.
and a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And does the organization not kick you out, but encourage you out of your comfort zone over to where the magic happens?
Yeah.
So recruitment and building community, training, and breakthroughs. If those are the things that organizations that work to deliver transformational
Yeah.
advocacy provide, and too many don't
Yeah.
do that.
And I think those principles apply even for individuals, right? Like even leaving aside the huge advocacy, when you're wanting to advocate for something, whether in your personal life or in your local community or otherwise, if you want to be the initiator of it as well, it's about starting to build relationship, right? Not trying to force an agenda, right? Today, I find people aren't talking. We're not, and hence the art of feminine negotiation. It's about listen more than we talk, surrender ego a little bit, maybe, and get curious about other perspectives. Now, you've mentioned transformational advocacy a couple of times. I know the subtitle of your book is Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. Tell us a little bit for our listeners, what is that? What is transformational advocacy and how can they apply it in their life?
Let me give an example of it. So I'm going to talk about a woman, Ellie Sparks. And Ellie Sparks said when she joined Citizens Climate Lobby, she was suffering from climate trauma. She would read she called it climate trauma.
Yeah.
She would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and she would weep at home and
Oh,
she would weep at work. And then she joined CCL and she basically got the training and the community that she needed. And she said, our executive director said, we're betting the farm on relationships. Now go get a relationship with your member of Congress and your editorial writer.
yeah.
And she said, well, what in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? And how do you get a relationship with an editorial writer? And she said, some in the organization use the model of a work relationship.
Yeah.
I use another model. I adore romantic relationships. So I use romance as my model. Now it's a whole other long reading that's fabulous, but I'm going to just tell you, and I pretty much know it by heart, what she says at the end. She goes to 20 congressional meetings over 4 days.
Wow.
And after the 20 meetings are over, she said, going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them.
Yeah.
I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work.
Yeah.
End of quote. Don't forget, she started at climate trauma.
Yeah. That's
And she
beautiful.
ended up at sacred and profound.
And
And
love.
for her, it was centering herself in love and really going into the next office,
Yeah.
centering in love and releasing fear, centering in love and releasing fear. And so I think that's a special example of transformational advocacy.
Yeah.
And
It's
also
beautiful.
a kind of feminine negotiation.
I was
Uh,
just going to say that. Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
And
It,
in every negotiation, I'd say, Sam, right? And for our listeners there, I encourage you, this is certainly for legislative lobbying, for political lobbying as you're getting in, and in every aspect of your life, whether you're negotiating with your kids, with your intimate partner, with service providers, with financial institutions, your business deals, coming from that place of compassion and
yeah.
openness and curiosity is an absolute game changer in how we approach negotiations. Not that prisoners, take no prisoners kind of approach, that power over others versus power
Yeah.
with. When you come from
Yeah.
that place of love, what a
Yeah.
changer.
I guess instead of put up your dukes, put up
Yeah.
your love in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not the person who's talking the loudest and longest that's so-called winning the negotiation. It's the person who doesn't see it as a zero-sum loss and who listens more than they talk. Now, I know you train your volunteers to ask 3 questions, I think, when they're meeting with an elected official who's opposed their bill. Tell us about those 3 questions. I love
Yeah,
to
and
hear that.
I'm assuming this is like dead center on feminine negotiations. So I'm coaching a group. They're going to meet a member of parliament or a member of Congress who opposes their
Yeah.
bill. Now, most people don't even bother. No, no, we get them in the game. And I have them ask 3 questions. One, we know you don't support this bill. What would it take to change your mind?
Yeah.
Now you're listening for assignments. So I'll give you an example in a moment. What would it take to change your mind? 2, could you say more about that?
Yeah.
3, why do you think that is? So it's a deep listening
Yeah.
exercise.
Absolutely.
You're asking them to go deeper and deeper on their beliefs and position. And the idea is if they go deep enough, you can actually end up at a place where you actually meet when it comes to values and goals and the like. There was a friend, he lived in Pennsylvania and he was flying to Florida, South Florida, quite regularly because he wanted to create a House Climate Solutions Caucus.
Mm.
And he knew that in South Florida, the sea level rise was going to be a
Yeah.
problem. And there were both Republican and Democratic members of the House. And he met with a member of Congress. He said, what would it take to change your mind? And the member of Congress said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board,
Oh.
that's his assignment. And he did.
Yeah.
Miami Beach, Coral Gables, North Miami,
Yeah.
South Miami. He comes back with the letters from the presidents of the chambers of Congress and commerce, and the congressman says, well, if you could get the mayors on board, and he did.
Yeah.
Miami Beach, Coral Gables, North Miami, comes back with letters from all the mayors. And it took almost 3 years
Wow.
to find the lead Democrat and lead Republican. But the Climate Solution Caucus was formed in 2016. At the end of the year, Donald Trump was elected president. It had 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats because they were going to do it Noah's Ark
Yeah.
style. Democrat needed to bring a Republican on board.
Yeah.
And it fell to 6 and 6 because some had either retired or
Yeah.
lost their race. By the end of year 2 of Trump's term, it had grown to 45 Republicans and 45 Democrats.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people listening, a
Yeah.
lot of people reaching out to get to that kind of
Yeah.
number.
And again, I want to put a pin for our listeners in those 3 simple questions and you're right, Ted, they do beautifully reflect, but part of what I would call the art of feminine negotiation, which isn't gender-based at all. It's about exactly what Sam said. Show up with absolute curiosity, right? Be listening more than you're talking. Be reflecting back to them their position in even more articulate language than they articulated. Don't be trying to lord over them, but come with genuine curiosity to learn. And I remember Jack Canfield years ago hearing him talk about said that anytime when you get a no, just say, what would it take to make that a yes? And then sit back and listen to that. I think it's just beautiful. And it applies, and again, for our listeners in all areas of your life, definitely for political activism and advocacy, absolutely. But think of the power in your personal relationships, in your professional relationships, when you allow yourself to get curious. I'm thinking for litigation. We are so conditioned to go in there, sort of asserting your position over the other, sort of dominating the conversation. And so often in litigation, the parties would be better served if everybody just got a little more curious and truly listened to what was important to the other party. There's often solutions there that are better than anything you could get in litigation. So I love your approach. And I know you advocate letting go of fear, and you talked about that, the example you gave where she showed up with love and let go of her fear and the trauma. But in particular, I know you also advocate about letting go of the fear to make big asks. And I'd love if you could talk about that, because I think often we don't. Women in particular, I think, are less likely to make big asks for themselves. So tell
Yeah.
me about that.
Yeah, and on this one, it's kind of like everybody. I talk about transformational advocacy, and it sounds really wonderful. Why don't we have more of it? And I say it's because of the staff's fear. I'm thinking nonprofit, staff's fear of making big asks of volunteers. And I'm going to give you an example. It could be also volunteers' fear of making big asks of all of other volunteers. When I'm coaching a group on delivering a structure of support and delivering transformational advocacy. It's a longer story, but at one point, having a launch workshop, you're launching a chapter, and let's say there are 20 people in the room. And one of the big asks is, well, anyone who raises their hand and says, I'm in this chapter, the first thing we're going to do is a 4-part new group training every week for 4 weeks, 90 minutes. That's a big ask.
Yeah.
4-part new group training. And so a lot of times the people out coach will think, I can't ask that. I mean, no one's going to raise their hand. They're all going to say no. So we make a little tiny puny ask,
Yeah.
and then people do a puny thing and they eventually
Yeah.
go away. So let me give an example. I was coaching a group and they were having their first ever monthly webinar. And I was coaching the guy who was delivering what we call the grassroots victory. And he said to me, our chapter is just 2 months old, 3 months old. And we've already met with 4 state legislators in Washington state, 2 state reps and 2 state senators. And one of the state reps is the chair of the Committee on Energy and Environment. And he knew everything about climate change, but he barely knew about their issue,
Yeah.
which was carbon dioxide removal, removing the carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And he asked our group if we would do a briefing for him and his committee staff. I said, well, you've had 4 meetings in 2 or 3 months, and you've already been asked to do a briefing to a
Yeah.
committee and their staff. Had you ever met with an elected official before these?
Yeah.
No, I'd never done it. I said, had you ever written? No, I never written. I never called. I never met. This is the first time for any of that. I said,
Yeah.
put that in your talk. If you don't say that, people are going to think, well, he's an expert. I'm
Yeah.
not an expert. He could do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But if you let them know you were a beginner like them,
Yeah.
they'll be, oh, well, maybe I could do it too.
Yeah.
And, but it all happened because a staff member was willing to get over their fear of
Yeah.
asking them to participate in a 4-part new group training.
Yeah.
And thus, they were able to know how to get the meeting, how to plan for the meeting, what to ask for in the meeting, and have all these successes early on by a staff member, in this case, getting over the fear of making big asks.
Yeah. And it's so important. Again, it circles back to what you're saying, Sam, about that comfort zone, right? If we stay in our comfort zone, I remember really seeing a visual of this that enforced it for me. I was on vacation and lying on the beach, and those little, is it the hermit crabs, the ones that kind of jump up out? And I saw this, and I just became mesmerized watching this little hermit crab. It would pop its head up, and then it would hear the waves. They weren't even coming close yet, but all of a sudden it would hear that and would start to come out, and then would pop back in its hole. And then it would come up and it would just go just a couple of inches. It would hear the waves and it would pop up in. And the entire time I watched, the waves never did come up to the hermit crab. And he missed out on all of those opportunities to explore because he stayed in the safe zone. So, and I want to reinforce for our listeners again, this idea about community. As you were talking about that earlier, it really struck me, like over my career as a social justice attorney, I've done a lot of work with trade unions and Amalgamated Transit Union. And, there was, with the increasing privatization and all sort of the risk to those unions, there was a lot of fighting and lobbying and chest beating about it. And then to their credit, like the union got really smart about it and started focusing on building relationship, building community, taking advantage of the fact that they're out on the buses, right? And speaking to the consumers. So they built students who are going to miss, the elderly who are not going to be able to get to their appointments. They built such a groundswell of community support that it forced the relationship with those political leaders. So it was a brilliant exercise of that.
Yeah.
Now, what do you see as the key reasons that negotiations fail, would you say, Sam, or advocacy efforts?
Well, again, they keep having us do these relatively ineffective and meaningless tasks.
Yeah,
Sign that petition, sign that email form letter, and there's not a real voice. And so we're ineffective, and then the advocacy effort is ineffective. If I could just share this one thing, results this anti-poverty lobby I founded 44 years ago. Over the last 40 years, Results has played a lead advocacy role in a 66% decline in global child deaths, lobbying every year
wow.
in Canada, in the United States, in
Yeah,
Britain, in Australia, and where it's fallen from 40,000 child deaths a day to 13,800 a day, which is, imagine
yeah,
being with an organization that's played a key advocacy role in a 66% decline in global child deaths since we started advocating in 1984. From that year, some 10 million lives are
yeah.
saved each year because of this
And that's not
tremendous.
even counting the ripple effect, right? I mean, my gosh, the ripple effect of that as well is fabulous. Now, on the flip side, with a more positive note, rather than why they fail, what would you say are the key skills, right, or the key hallmarks that you think mark a great negotiator or advocate, somebody who does effective advocacy?
Again, I think part of it is storytelling, and I'm going to tell a quick little
Yeah.
story. I'm going to talk about Maxine Thomas, has a lived experience in poverty, grew up in Indianapolis. She said to me, I had a heart for service, but I was clueless about
Yeah.
advocacy,
Yeah.
especially political advocacy. And then
Yeah.
she joins a group called Circles of Women, mostly women, working together to move out of poverty. And they learn that they have a story to tell, and they Google around what's a group that could help us tell their story. And they find Results, the anti-poverty lobby I founded. And eventually, Maxine and two others, Maxine gets a scholarship to go to the Results conference in Washington, D.C. She borrows luggage to go to D.C.
Yeah.
And the night before her first ever meeting with her, well, the first meeting is with her U.S. senator, and then she meets the others. She learns that the earned income tax credit's about to expire, which is a real big benefit to her own family. Anyway, the bottom
Ah,
line is she goes to these meetings, she tells her story and how the earned income tax credit makes a big difference in her own family's life. And at the end of the day of meetings, first ever, she said, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something
yeah.
revolutionary. She started it. I was clueless
Yeah.
about advocacy. She ends up, I was euphoric. Clueless to euphoric is the transformational
Yeah.
advocacy part of it. And part of it is because she got training.
Yeah.
Part of it is because she was encouraged to do something she'd never done before. And part of it was because she told her story
Yeah.
and she shared herself.
I so love that. And again, for our listeners there, I want think about how often you invoke the art of storytelling. Storytelling is as old as the human experience, right? I mean, it goes back to the earliest possible times. And we kind of got away from it, right? Where everything was indoctrination with, some of our entertainment and too much and too fast. And I really invite you in all of your sort of advocacy, whether it's self advocacy or for organizational groups or political advocacy or in litigation, you name it, invoke storytelling. And it's funny you say that, Sam, because as you're saying that, I was thinking about people used to look at me like I'd sprouted an extra head. Because even as a very young lawyer, without even just naturally, it came to me to tell stories because it humanizes it. It creates a connection. It creates a bond. I never just focused on the law. My kids would go crazy. I'd use examples from my kids. Geez, this reminds me of my son and blah, blah, blah. And this happened. And immediately the adjudicators, some consciously, some, I think many unconsciously, were hooked in to the pitch of what the particular thing we were advocating for. I'm curious, what's one of the most surprising or, things that you discovered while researching or writing your book?
Well, let me say it a different way. I've been working promoting the book and the like, and I've been invited by the Chicago Sun-Times, the Tennessean in Nashville, Tennessee, and then a New Jersey paper to write a column
Yeah.
that tells the story of volunteers. So I've been telling about volunteers in Illinois and volunteers in Tennessee and volunteers in New Jersey. I've been just thrilled to hear these stories. I'm talking about this year in New Jersey. It was a volunteer from Results, which I've mentioned, a volunteer from Citizens Climate Lobby, which I've mentioned, a volunteer from the Quaker Lobby, Friends Committee on National Legislation on Peace Issues, and a volunteer from Catholic Relief Services. And they're all stories of mini transformations or major transformation. That's been the surprise, that it's kind of keeps happening. And I think in the program notes, you might be including a link to how people could let me know that they'd like to be connected
Yeah.
with one of these kinds of groups. So, because doing it alone doesn't quite work unless you're working on your very own project
Yeah.
and bring others in on your very own project. But how they could be connected to my work with Civic Courage, to one of these groups, and the like.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll make sure for our listeners to have that in the show notes as well and encourage you to do that. And I can't believe this has gone by so quickly. See your art of storytelling and sharing stories. And I appreciate you being vulnerable about sharing your why as well. And I normally like to end, Sam, by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? Doesn't have to be about this issue, just, one of those aha moments that had you think about things differently or look at them differently.
Oversimplified, it's from I don't make a difference to I do make a difference.
Uh,
And it's not just like I make a difference in my own life or in my family, which we all usually experience, or on my block, or maybe even my community. No, in the whole world, I make a difference. Man, that's a shift from, where I would have been. The other piece was shut off. It was closed down. And
yeah.
this whole notion that I make a difference is been repeated, not only in my life, in the lives of others that I observe over
Yeah.
and over.
And gosh, think of the power of that if we start really reinforcing that message from the youngest possible ages, kindergarten and in that elementary school experience. And you think of all the angst of our youth out there, always feeling that worried about fitting in, worried about what a beautiful mindset shift that is, right? I make a
Well,
difference.
I always say if everyone realized the difference they make, there wouldn't be enough problems to go around. If we had so many change
That's so
makers out
good.
there, there aren't enough problems for all the people. But sadly, it's not quite that way
Uh,
yet.
Well, we can at least start here. So for all of the listeners out there, anybody who happens to be seeing this as well, I challenge you right now to say, I make a difference. I make a difference. Have it be your new mantra. When you wake up in the morning and you're looking in the mirror just before you brush your teeth, look yourself in the eyes and say, I make a difference and I can make a difference. That's what a beautiful message to take away. So how can people learn more about you, Sam?
Well, I mean, if they go to reclaimingourdemocracy.com, there's a sign up sheet there and in the program notes, and they can find ways to connect with one of these groups that could help propel the difference people can and want to
Yeah.
make, kind of thing. And if people have a speaking opportunity, they can let me know on that form also.
Beautiful. And again, if you're driving or don't have a piece of paper handy, don't worry. That'll be in the show notes. Just go back and check in our show notes and you'll be able to grab the links to be able to do that as well. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being here today and sharing. Thank you for putting your book out into the world. It's so important, always and now in particular. So thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And for our listeners, I have no doubt there was so much value in there. I hope you enjoyed this episode and took away a lot of value for yourself, both personally, professionally, and in terms of lobbying and doing some political activism and advocacy out there as well. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done it, and make sure to share this episode with others in your life. If we can imagine everybody getting out there and getting the benefit of the power of saying, I make a difference, and taking steps to find a cause that they feel passionately about. And for you, that you feel passionately about, let's be sharing and get a little momentum behind this movement. And before we sign off today, I'd like to talk about a few ways that maybe we could work together. And don't worry, whatever stage you're at, I specialize in teaching both really seasoned practitioners as well as early stage attorneys a better way to practice, to be more authentic, less battle worn, like you feel like you're just constantly dragged down by the constant fight, and ultimately significantly more effective in doing that. And if you'd love the opportunity to either have those conversations and for yourself and or to help your firm thrive and stand out, please just go to www.practicingwithpurpose.org. You can book a consultation or just check out a little bit more about the concept. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world while negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.